Hey everybody, Bobby Medina here with my good buddy Paul Barron, and today we are bringing you a very special and a very interesting guest here. You may have seen him on some of his own videos. He's very well spoken. He's a fantastic trumpeter. He's been a professional freelance trumpet player based in the St. Louis area for over 30 years. He's currently the principal trumpet with the Muny Orchestra during the summer times, and that's been since 1993, so that goes back a ways. He's performed with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, Kansas City Symphony, and the Illinois Symphony. And he's also played with a lot of celebrities, including Tony Bennett, my old employer, Ray Charles. He's played with Doc Severinsen, Aretha Franklin, Johnny Mathis, The Temptations. I got 4 shows coming up with The Temptations next month. And a list that goes on forever. He's also played for numerous national touring shows at St. Louis Fabulous Fox Theater. He's played Wicked there, Chicago, The Producers, Hairspray, West Side Story, and many others. Spent 2 years with the national tour of the stage musical Dirty Dancing. He's toured in the US, Japan, Canada as the lead trumpet player with the Glenn Miller Orchestra. And he's got his own solo recording called Mr. Gentle, Mr. Cool. And he's also the author of a great trumpet book called Trumpet Mania. And he's also a soloist and a guest clinician around the Midwest area of the United States. And he's got his own YouTube channel as well. And he likes to talk about trumpet and all the many related topics, including different forms of studies and different Broadway shows and discussions of favorite players. So we're going to get into that. So welcome, Andy Tichenor. Great to have you here.
Great to be here, guys. Great.
Man,
pleasure.
I'm exhausted from your long list of credentials. Holy cow.
I can't wait to hear what I have to say. Geez.
Well, so Bobby mentioned the Muni Theater and that you've been the principal trumpet player for decades now. And I know the history behind it, but I know that our listeners or viewers would love to hear more about that and your involvement for all those many years. So can you just give us a little history and how all of that works?
It's a very unique thing. You know, St. Louis has its own version of Central Park, only here it's called Forest Park. And it's actually much larger than Central Park. People may not realize. It has a zoo, it has a history museum, it has all these fabulous things. And literally right in the middle of it is an 11,000 seat theater. It's an outdoor theater and it has a 7-show season and it's been there for over 100 years. And back in the day, 100 years ago, it was all grand opera. You know, it was all, and there's cool old black and white photos of these just unbelievably vast productions. They were doing things like, you know, I don't know any operas, but, you know, they were doing grand opera. And over time, it became all about Broadway, you know, Broadway shows. It's not tours. I mean, we have played for some tours, but it's all locally produced stuff. And what it is now is it is developed into, like I say, I think it's 103 years now coming up. And it was just, it's this civic thing. Ever since it started, I believe, it has a section at the very top of the auditorium of 1,500 seats. They're free. Anybody can go. You have to enter from the top of the theater and it's, you know, 11,000 seats. So just picture, you know, a giant amphitheater. I think it's the largest outdoor stage in the US. I think it is. Anyway, they've had an orchestra, obviously, for all these years. And I've played in it. I've had the good fortune of being in it since 1993. The pit, if you can imagine, is the width of the stage. It's a kind of a unique thing because I'll get into this in a minute. They recently, in the last few years, they spent something like $50 million redoing the stage. And so now the orchestra is like a lot of European opera orchestras were under the stage. But for many years, this giant orchestra sat right in front out in the elements. And you learn a lot about how to play when you're getting rained on. That was always, you know, and heat. Oh, you know, if you've been to St. Louis in the summer, it's not just hot, it is humid, baby. And that's wwhy the beard just came off. You might have seen my last couple of YouTube videos. I had the look like Game of Thrones, you know, sitting out in that summer heat in the Muni, but that was always the gig. It's part of the gig, you know, playing all these shows. And it's a 7-show season, like I say, all produced at the Muni. And we've done all the classics. You know, if I'm on one end of the pit, I was always on stage left side. Trumpets were always on stage left side. Percussion behind us. And there could be people in the string section. They could be over 50, 60 yards away from me. You know, if you're playing in the back of the string section and I'm on, you know what I mean? It's like ridiculous logistics, basically. Ridiculous.
They got to go long, right? You know?
Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby. I mean, the conductors that figure it out are the ones that do the grand gesture, who are just take everything and do it blown up. And, you know, it lends itself to a kind of playing. You have to play larger than life. You have to be sort of, you know, playing lead trumpet on a Broadway show. You know, you're kind of setting the stage for everybody, you know, musically speaking. Well, in a 11,000 seat auditorium, there's just something mentally, you know, comes over you, and you just become a force of nature, basically. That's how I've always, you know, that's sort of how I've approached it. You know, you just mentally, and I know there's nobody on God's green earth, Maynard, Doc, nobody can fill an 11,000 seat auditorium. But there's a thing mentally that comes over you, you know, when you're playing in that kind of venue. And it's obviously, it's all mic and it's everything, right? But there's something when you hear it, you know, when the sound is good, on the nights that the sound is working, and you hear yourself playing, and that sound is just like ringing all through the park. It just kind of, you know, it just sort of does something to you mentally, is what I'm trying to say.
So I'm curious, like when, you know, just as far as talking about miking and all that stuff, I'm always curious about monitors, you know. Are you using monitors there, or are you using like in-ears or wireless in-ears, or what kind of setup do you have when you're playing a show there?
I used in the outdoor pit. Okay, when we were outdoors, we started getting headphone mixes. You know, the little you know, AVMs. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the problem with them, the entire brass section was in one track.
Oh.
Yeah,
so if you turned it up, you got French horn, trombone, you got everything. And I finally, after years of this, but you know, you get to, you know, you always want to be at the friend of the sound man. You know,
Absolutely.
we all want to yell and wring his neck some nights, right? I finally convinced those guys to put in a trumpet one track on the AVM. That really helped, because, you know, you just, in those circumstances, you just have to hear yourself.
Well, and I'm sure it helped everybody else as well, because if the strings are trying to hear the lead trumpet, you know, solo or whatever, and they're turning up the brass and they're getting the third trumpet blasting, that's not going to be as helpful.
Yeah, well, I know the drummers always told me, yeah, I got that, I've got you cranked. And you know, that's such an important relationship.
It sure is.
Musically speaking, drums and lead trumpet. That helped it right away. But that's only been the last few years. Now, fast forward, we're under the stage now. They completely, I'm trying to think, maybe this is maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. The day after we closed the season, they started ripping the stage apart and completely gutted it. Rebuilt the whole thing, and they put the band under the stage. Now we're underneath, and that created some new issues. You know, it's almost impossible to describe, but we're under the stage. The conductor is on a giant podium. It's like a hydraulic thing. You know, we call it the conductivator. He goes like, he's like halfway between, so he can have a visual with the stage and a little bit with the pit too. But he's very far away, so they put him on a monitor. The problem now is there's a little bit of delay. You know, when you see that, it's not quite, that's not really the downbeat. Now we kind of pretty much have to use headphones. It feels much more like a recording studio. And so that's kind of changed the, you know, I missed those years of the sound just bouncing all over the hall, you know, that 11,000 seat hall, right? I kind of missed that a little bit.
Have you changed your approach then to playing?
A little bit. Honestly, I feel like I don't have to work quite so hard. Like I'm saying, mentally, you see those 11,000 seats, and I'm sorry, but you just mentally, there's oh man, I got to fill all this up. I don't play, I guess you could say, quite so force of nature-y, if that makes any sense. No, it's just like, I'm going to save the show single-handedly here. I don't really necessarily feel that anymore.
Right. You only have to go as far as the microphone now.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel like it feels more controlled. It's also air conditioned.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking maybe you're in a tuxedo out there in the sweltering heat. I wasn't sure, but yeah. So how large is the orchestra there?
Well, it's still, for many years we were doing, I think the basic orchestra, it's a tenured orchestra. So the basic orchestra is around 20-ish. But for many years we did, the old shows. I remember we did King and I once with 33 musicians in the pit.
Wow.
Nobody does that. Nobody, You're never going to do that. We did King and I, we did it with 3 basses. We had 3 double basses in the pit, that kind of thing. All the original the old school stuff, the Rodgers and Hammerstein, all that stuff. Well, when you do it with the 10 brass, it's like 9 and 10 in the brass section alone. I mean, it's a glorious sound, and you just never get that anywhere. Right. Yeah. And that's what we've done for years. We've done that, modern Broadway. They're starting to do a lot newer shows. Well, we know what that means is everything is shrunk, right? It's smaller and smaller. So that's true everywhere, right? Yeah. The orchestra is shrinking.
But at least we have to work that much harder though.
Yeah. I mean, just what we wanted.
Yeah.
But, it's a very unique institution, that I've been really honored to be a part of for many years. It's a big civic thing. It's like in St. Louis, it's the equivalent of like going to a Cardinal baseball game. It's just the whole family comes. It's just in fact, I've been at the Muni when an intermission, they announce like milestones that have happened during Cardinal games and at the Muni. Like the night Mark McGwire hit his 500th career home run. Wow. They announced it at intermission and the place went bananas. It's a proud St. Louis tradition. It really is. I'm not trying to sound like some cliche here, but it really is very cool. It's a very cool thing. And it's an amazing thing to be at least a little, have played a little piece, a little part of it, all these years.
Well, you're playing first trumpet down there, and I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here.
Yeah.
But your sound is beautiful. You have this big, glorious, rich sound up, throughout the registers and all that. And I love hearing that. And there's a lot of influences in your playing that I know you've talked about, and I know Conrad Gozzo's one of them. But let's talk a little bit about your lead trumpet playing, your approach to it, and your influences in that area.
Yeah, a lot of my biggest heroes are the old school guys. Gozzo, Bernie Glow has been a heavy influence on me. Once I got hip to him, it was an interesting thing back when I was in college. This is like late 80s, early 90s time. And I was doing like all of us did. I was in a Maynard phase for a long time, listened to everything with Maynard on it. What happened is Marvin Stamm came and did a clinic at my college, and he hit me to all of these New York guys from like the 50s and 60s. That's where I first heard the name Bernie Glow. And then Snooky Young, Ernie Royal, Clark Terry. I mean, Clark Terry was one of the working New York studio cats in the 60s, Anyway, these guys wound up having a heavy influence on me. There's just a way that those guys are blowing. There's like a resonance to that kind of blowing that those guys were doing. Those recordings, those early Miles big band things with Gil Evans. There's a just purity to that brass sound on that stuff.
That's Bernie in the back of those, right?
And Ernie Royal too. Yep.
Yeah.
I have that recording. I got a bunch of them, but that recording of Porgy and Bess, and the first note, he just comes in and it's an high A, it's just like nailing that thing.
I know. That
pretty
kind
crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of thing, that just like seared itself into my mind, right? So when I'm playing lead trumpet, I got all those recordings in the back of my head. Conrad Gozzo is still I've been pretty clear on my YouTube channel, and there's just something about that golden sound that he has. It still just jumps out at me. It just I get goosebumps right now talking about him. There's something about that man and his playing. His life story is kind of sad, but he died very young. But man, the legacy he left behind, and then there's all the LA guys. Like I say, that era, you got guys like Al Pacino, all the old LA guys from the studio days.
Yuan Racy.
Yuan's playing. Oh my God. all the way up, and all those old MGM musicals, with Yuan playing all that stuff, Singing in the Rain, and that just ridiculous heavy vibrato, and that has influenced my playing, especially on the old Broadway stuff. I just talked about that in my last YouTube video about vibrato and that heavy vibrato those old guys had. That stuff is all, everything, I listen to it all. It's all in here somewhere, it's all had an influence. The most heaviest influence directly was my teacher, Chris Jodis. I was lucky to get before he left for New York. Everybody thinks he's New York. He's from St. Louis. Well, I got to sit next to him playing lead trumpet and hearing that huge, sound sitting right there. There's something about hearing it happening right next to you. The recordings are great. They're all wonderful. But there's something about hearing somebody live, like really doing it, sitting right next to you, that is it's just mind altering, literally.
We talk about this a lot, about having it in your mind first.
Yeah.
And then you're able to replicate it. And there's people that have told us, well, we can hear things, but I don't know how to replicate it. I don't know how to make that kind of sound. For me, my first sounds were Mexican mariachi trumpets, opera that my mother used to play, and opera singers and orchestra. So those were my first influences, and that's this big fat vibrato-y sound and all that. And then it developed, and I got hip to a lot of these guys you're talking about. But for you, when you actually wanted to work on playing in this style, for instance, what did you practice to train yourself to do that? Let's go there. Let's see.
A part of what I've done over time is I tried to play along with some of these records. I tried to play, kind of hit myself to I'd put on like some of those Sinatra sides, and I would screw them up, because I'd be like, it was twofold, right? I was kind of a great ear training kind of practice, right? Just trying to figure out licks in my head, right? And trying to play along with them. What I gained from that was just how fearless you have to be to play that, just to play in that style. Like if you want to talk about Conrad Gozzo, there's just an absolutely ferociousness to it, where you're just absolutely with no fear, kind of playing. So trying to play along with that stuff and realizing here, sitting in my little practice room, playing along, I'm not exactly Mr. Ferocious here, sitting in my bedroom practicing. And it just this mentally just started to realize how much just more you have to bring to it than just what, playing. I tell my students this all the time: don't play for the music stand. The music stand is not your audience, right? You have to get it. It's just got to be this grand, huge gestures. That's what I mentally try to be all about. And playing at the Muni all these years has kind of informed that a little bit, trying to have that just utter fearlessness as a player. And I started to get a little sense of that playing along with the record, playing along with, those old Capitol Studio sides with Sinatra. They're all perfect little 3-minute vignettes for Frank. And man, the band stuff, when they get a few moments to shout, the shout on those, it's just mind blowing. Believe it or not, back in the day, remember the Music -1 records? You guys remember those?
Sure.
There were some lead trumpet ones. There was like a Buddy Rich. There was some Buddy Rich charts, and it was.
I don't think I've ever seen those in Music -1. I've only seen like the classical types, and maybe there were some that were sort of like Dixielandish. I think I remember one that I came across.
Yeah, there was a lead trumpet one, at least one that I found. And it was the whole band minus the lead trumpet track, and you were it, right? So I'd put that record on, crank it, and then and it had the charts. It came with a book of lead trumpet charts. And I remember sitting in my room trying to do like the first chart. I think was, remember Dancing Men? That was a Buddy Rich chart. I think it's called the Dancing Men or something like that. All I remember about it is there's like 58 D's in it, right? And I'm like, double forte D's, like just above high C. And I was a kid, I'm a teenager trying to play this crap and realizing, oh my God, I couldn't get through like one line of the thing. And I was like, oh my God, so it was all part of this process of realizing how much more how much more you need to bring to this other than just, you know, you do your quiet little practicing in your bedroom like I was doing as a young player. Like, wow, it's kind of, I guess I could say it was expanding my mind in a lot of ways, realizing, oh, I have to bring that much more to this.
Oh, absolutely.
Not just mentally, but physically.
Well, that was my question in the back of my mind just now, as you were leading up to this. How much of trumpet playing for you is mental and how much is physical? If you can even put it into those terms, I'm not sure, but I'm just throwing it out there.
For me, I think it's actually changed a bit over the years. It feels way more mental to me now than physical. I feel like now mentally, I feel like I can, you know, like I've just taken some time off recently dealing with some health issues. And you know what? I came right back. You know, I put the horn out, I got the horn out of the case and just, I'm like, okay, this is going to suck, and put it on my chops. And you know what? It wasn't that bad, you know, because I have the sound is here. The sound that, you know, over these years, the sound that I want, that I'm going for is right here. You know, I really feel that mental aspect. So I don't know, to put a number on it, might be 70-30, 75-25 mental, you know, it's very mental for me. And, you know, as a younger player, I went through a lot of just damage, abuse, you know, pain. You know, I think a lot of us have been there, you know, playing in pain.
I have.
Yeah. I'm hip, you know. I remember being on the road and bleeding, like literally going like, oh, look at that blood. You know, that's, I know, I've been there. You know, over time, you have to go through these. I mean, you guys just did a great video about, you know, tired, beat up chops.
Yeah.
You know, I went through a lot of that as a younger player, the physical abuse, if you will. So,
well, that's a great segue then. What have you learned then over those years, you know, changing it from maybe 75-25 physical to the other way around?
Well,
what have you learned, like how to recover from brutal gigs, just to tie it into our previous video?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I used to go through, like, I used to experiment with things like warming down. And you know what I discovered over the years? My favorite warm down is throw the horn in the case and go home. That's my warm down. I literally, the gig's over, I go home. When I'm in the middle of a show, okay, only then. I'm not ashamed to say I don't really practice. I mean, I might do a little of the chop flopping, you know, the real gentle, you know, really gentle, just to kind of get some life back. But I don't touch the horn until I get back to the theater the next night, you know, and I'll get there early. I'm always early. I'm always the first one in the pit, except you, Paul. When I get there early, who's sitting there with coffee waiting for me? Paul. God bless you. But that gives me, you know, whatever, 20 hours, 21 hours of rest. And so I get to the theater the next night. And again, I've got a really firm concept of what I want to produce when I put it up to my face, what I want to happen. But so that time between shows is my best. That's the number one thing for me. Because, you know, I used to try to practice my way out of problems. You know, at some point I learned, wow, I can't practice my way out of this one. Because a lot of what I was going through was just, I just need to pull the horn away and just this, you know, it just needs to rest. It needs to breathe. So I found, I mean, there's little things like I drink lots of water, you know, that's just good for, you know, that's just good for it. That, a little chop flopping, but I don't really touch it until the next night. Now that's not, like I say, that's if I'm in the middle of a run. If I'm playing, especially if I'm playing West Side Story that week, or Chorus Line, or Producers, or, you know, one of the huge blows, you know, Gypsy, especially then. Now, if I'm not in the middle of that, you know, then it's time. Okay, you know, it's go time on the practice front. You know, I get the books out. I get back at it. But you know, I think actually Bud Herseth has actually been a huge influence on me. You know, it's probably the best lead player ever. You know, if you think about it. But he always said, on the weeks you have Mozart, practice Mahler. The weeks you have Mahler, practice Mozart. Now I take it a step further and I don't practice at all.
You know, there's another thing here at play, and I was one of these people for a long, long time where I would like almost never take a day off from playing. And it was my own hang up, you know, and funny enough, like both Stamp and Bobby Shue gave me some advice. And Stamp was like, I went on vacation with Maurice Andre and his wife last summer. I remember this was in the fall when I was in college. And he says, can you believe it? He had his piccolo and he was practicing every day. And he said, I asked him, why are you practicing, man? You were like Maurice Andre. You know how to do this, you know?
Yeah.
He says, well, I have commitments coming up and this and that. He says, yeah, I understand. But he says, you know, you could do a little lip buzzing. You could do a few isometrics and enjoy your 10 days or whatever it might be of relaxation and come back. And so he said he did. He tried it and he realized, yeah, I can do this. And Shue told me one time, he said, I learned how to sail. And he says, I took a 6-week course in sailing. And he says, I came back and the day I came back, I had to do a gig that night. And he said, I picked up the horn, hadn't touched it in 6 weeks. I did a little lip fluttering, played a few notes at home, went to the gig. He said, yeah, he said, I felt it. But he said it wasn't like it just evaporated and disappeared.
Right.
And now I feel the same way. And Paul and I have had this conversation, especially over COVID, because so many people didn't want to practice because they didn't feel like there was anything to practice for. Yeah. I was the opposite. I was like, man, I got time to practice now. I'm going to dig into all this other fun stuff, you know?
Yeah, cool.
I think a lot of the practice and getting away from the horn is in your head.
Oh, it's so important. I don't know how much true that is if you're a younger developing player. You know, I don't know really, you know, how true that could be. But, you know, again, it's just, you know, we're all, you know, more experienced players here.
Yeah. And I do mean that as that we jump to these different levels of playing. And when you're on a much higher level, you understand what it takes to get the machine rolling again. And it's not too bad sometimes.
You know, interestingly, the interesting thing for me is I feel like getting the air column back, just getting it kind of woken back up again. But it's my air that seems to take like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, we got to do this. We're doing this again, you know. But, you know, maybe it's another day or so, you know, it's back up and running again.
So do you have like some breathing exercises or something you do beyond playing trumpet that helps you with that?
I do a lot. I'll sit. If I'm just sitting, I'll just do like in through the nose, out through my mouth, which I know is not how, I breathe. Certainly not how I breathe when I play. But those deep inhalations and slow exhalations, you know, where you're just filling up the whole tank and then exhaling, you know, that kind of thing. I'll do some of that. I used to do those. Remember Claude Gordon had all those breathe in for 8, hold for 8, breathe out in 8. And there's endless varieties of those. Yeah. And I would do goofy ones. I'd breathe in over 20 and try to hold it for 20 and then breathe out for, I'd get the number as high as I could. Yeah. Silly stuff like that. To go along with what you were saying, Bobby, as far as taking time off, my favorite story about that actually is you on Racy and the Chinatown solo. The cat was out fishing and he came back after 2 weeks. That was his first day back, the Chinatown solo, what you hear in the movie.
Now, I don't know how it is for you guys, but I 100% agree. And, I took some time off over the COVID a little bit and came back and it felt great. But for me, the day coming back feels great, maybe the second day. But if I were coming back to an 8-show week, especially a heavy blowing one, maybe the first show back would be good. The second show might be just fine as well. But then after that, then there's the stamina and endurance that still does need to be built back up again.
Yeah, you hit the wall. There's like a wall you hit.
Yeah.
And the hardest part for me to really get back is the fine tuning stuff.
Yeah.
If I've got like, double tonguing stuff or just really precision tonguing kind of stuff, like playing a legit thing. But I know what you're saying, Paul, that you kind of hit that wall about third, fourth day.
Takes some lifting. You just got to do it. There's no way around that.
Yeah. No way around it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, if I have a run of shows to do, I kind of keep myself fairly ramped up. I took off, this was many, many years ago when I was first married, and we took a trip. My wife is Swedish, and we went all the way. I'd always wanted to go down to Greece, and we went interrailing at that time all over Europe. We took like, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks off. And I decided I'm not going to play for a month. And when I came back, when we got back to Sweden, I pulled it out and I figured which end to blow in. And then I went, wow, you know, doesn't sound too bad. Wow, I could still hit these high notes of that. But what I noticed, and I swore I would never do it again, was it took like months, it felt like, to get my accuracy back. My accuracy completely went out the window. But I was a much younger player back then, you know, much less experienced. So I don't know that it would affect me in that same manner these days. I don't think it would quite as much, but I feel like if I can just stay on it, just even a little bit each day, 15, 20 minutes, that's enough to kind of keep the machine oiled up a little bit,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So let's tell us a little bit about your book, Trumpet Mania, because you have some interesting things you talk about on your channel, which we're going to put down below also, so everybody can check that out, and we'll let everybody know where they can get a hold of this book as well. But tell everybody a little bit about it, what it covers, and what your thinking process was when you put it all together.
Yeah, it was a project I jumped into mid 2000s. It was a project I got busy with, and kind of needed a project at that time. And, you know, I had for a long time, I had been writing stuff for myself, like little studies, you know, like to do things, you know, sitting in the practice room, figuring out like things like playing in fourths, you know, up and down the horn, things like that, you know. And I just kind of got busy with this, like, well, what could be, you know, I'll be perfectly honest. I got really bored with Clark Technical Studies. I got really bored with, you know, Arbenz. I got, you know, I mean, and that's me. That's not the book. It's me, the ADD brain or whatever. I just got bored with some stuff. And, you know, what I did is I wrote a bunch of stuff for myself that was just really freaking hard. You know, it over the course of 2 or 3 years, you know, just kind of sat with the horn and just wrote stuff that I thought, hey, this would be cool. Let's try this. And it's informed by, you know, all the instruction I had. My teacher was Chris Jonas, and we went through all the standard books, you know, Stamp, Clark, Schlossberg, Arbenz, the Colon Advanced Lip Flexibilities, you know, all that stuff. And so it's obviously influenced and informed by all that stuff. And it's not meant to replace anything. You know, I wrote it literally just as a challenge to myself. And so, you know, over time, I realized, wow, I've really got a lot of these studies built up here. Maybe this would equal a book. That was kind of the start of the whole thing. I kind of enjoyed writing these exercises for myself. And then I started laying them on my students. I had students. I'm like, hey, you know, I had a kid who had some trouble with tonguing, and I had these 2-octave scale things that I was doing, 2-octave single tongue scales, you know. And what I was finding was that when I played stuff over multiple octaves, like two or sometimes 3 octaves, it's like, man, over time, my chops, I felt like Superman, and like the sound. And I like to think that I have a consistent sound from low to high, back to low again. You know, that to me is a hallmark of a really fine player. And I was kind of like finding, wow, I like different types of stuff over 2 octaves, like doing slur studies, you know, that eventually wind up, maybe start small and then grow. You know, the students I was laying these studies on, they were all getting helped by it. They were all seemed to be improved. You know, so over time, then I sat and I started like, well, what if I did a chapter on different trumpet players that I like to listen to? And so, okay, then it started growing into, so I started putting chapters in about, I called them all nuts and bolts. And at some point I started, you know, of the mindset of, well, okay, this is going to be Andy everything trumpet. You know, that's what it was kind of turning into. And then I started writing etudes. I'm like, well, what would be cool if we had an etude written in this style? So I wrote a lead trumpet etude. I recorded, it's on my YouTube channel. I thought, well, wouldn't that be interesting? Put a couple of, like kind of techniques you use as a lead player, turns and rips and fall offs and, you know, stuff like that. You know, I thought, well, okay, I'm not sure I see that everywhere. So I thought that'd be interesting. So I wrote etudes. So anyway, so this thing grew into this kind of big bunch of stuff, and all these chapters. And And wow, it's like 125 pages or something. It's like this massive stuff. I think kind of the last thing that I kind of put in was I got hip to lip bending studies. Those are really cool. So I wrote out, so I thought, okay, well, let's put some of that in. And, and I built it. Basically, I put the book together like I used to do my routine, which is warming up, and then fingers. I used to do Clark Technical second. That was fingers. And then slurring, worked on slurring, what I call control. I learned a lot about control of the instrument from doing all those Schlossberg slur studies, those early ones in the book, like number 32, number 25, those little kind of short slur studies in the Schlossberg. I always felt like I gained a lot of knowledge about control of the instrument. So I wrote slur studies. I wrote some single tongue studies, a la like Goldman, the Goldman book. That was a big one I used to practice out of, especially those first 4 out of the Goldman book.
I love those.
Yeah, they're great. There's like probably the best thing on single tonguing. And, I used to practice the Goldmans and I would do them. And then when I would get to the end, I would try to arpeggiate up as high as I could at the end of the page, right? If you can get through a whole Goldman page and then arpeggiate it up as high as you can go, just to see if you've got it, if you could do that up to like G or whatever, okay, you got some chops, baby. Those are hard. So I started writing my own stuff like that, things that went up all the way up. And eventually, and I got hip to the, where I don't know what they call that, where you start the studies like in the middle. The Clark studies, they start at low and they go high. Well, the ones that start in the middle and then go up a half step and then down. So
spider webbing, I've heard that called, I think.
Ooh, I like that. That's cool. Spider webbing. All right. But I wrote stuff like that, so by the end, you're playing one study that goes up to G, and then the very next study, you're down to F sharp. Okay, again, trying to cross those octaves, right, as much as you can. And I thought, man, this is really hard. But, I'm getting some benefit. I was finding real benefits to my playing across multiple octaves like that.
Now, and you recently have a new addition to the book as well, right?
Well, this is kind of a long story, but it's been out 10 years now. And it's slowly, sold. And we're down to like the last like half box of books now. So it's time they want to do a second edition. But there's some info that needs to get revised. So it's going to go through a bit of a revision as far as some of the info that's in the book. I was mentioning to you guys before, I've been talking to Bobby Shue about some stuff, who's obviously the master when it comes to, anatomy and physics and mechanics and science and all that kind of stuff. And I wrote it, not with any ill intent, but I think there is some info that needs to be sort of updated. Again, before we were just going to just slap a new fancy cover on it, put a few nice blurbs on it, maybe, if anybody actually liked it enough to give me a blurb. And I reached out to some nice folks, and but it's going to go through a little bit of revision, not a stem to stern. It's still, the studies obviously are still, I still get a lot of benefit out of them. But some of the info needs to be tweaked a little bit, if you will. But it's I'm not sure what the time frame is exactly, but it is going to be a second edition and a little bit of a revision to it.
You said something here with this, and I think this is, if there's maybe one takeaway that I'm getting that I hope everybody will take to heart here. I've been reading about this and studying about, both Paul and I have studied a lot with martial arts, and we talk about the sports field, right? And the mental field as well. But you're in an area here, what you're talking about is playing at the edge of your abilities,
Yep.
And in a traditional sort of sense, and people do things just by rote. Here's my routine. This is what I do. This keeps me in shape. But a lot of people, I think, forget about trying to go to the edge of their extremes. And this is where you make great strides in your playing and break your plateaus and move forward. So I think that's points well taken in your book. Andy, I know we're just about out of time here, but we really appreciate you coming on board here and being part of the group and all the nice things you say in there, and for your this in-depth interview is really great to learn about another great St. Louis musician, because I know there's been a whole lot of you come out of that town, so it's a pleasure. And we'll probably have to bring you back for part 2 as well at some point, because we're just scratching the surface. But thank you so much for spending a little time with us here, and with everybody in the group as well. I'm sure they'll approve of this. So it's been great to talk with you.
It's been awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Andy.
Okay. Thanks. Take care.